What if you've never had an original thought? Not because you're unintelligent, and not because you're being controlled by some secret organization, but because from the moment you were born, people began telling you who you were, what success meant, what was possible, what was impossible, and how life was supposed to be lived. Before you were old enough to question any of it, the programming had already begun. Most people spend their entire lives inside this invisible system without ever realizing it exists. They call it their personality, their opinions, their goals, their identity. But what if the person you think you are is only a collection of beliefs, fears, memories, and conditioning that you've mistaken for yourself? Carl Jung believed that much of what controls our lives operates outside our awareness, while Eckhart Tolle taught that human beings are trapped in constant identification with thought. What if they were both pointing toward the same hidden truth? What if the Matrix is not a machine, not a place, but a prison made from everything you have mistaken for yourself? And if that's true, how would you ever know whether you're awake or still dreaming? Welcome to Until Awakening. Today we're going to explore a question that may completely change the way you see your mind, your identity, and the invisible patterns shaping your life. If you enjoy exploring ideas about awareness, consciousness, and personal transformation, consider subscribing and joining our growing community. Now take a slow breath, because every awakening begins with a moment of awareness, a moment just like this one. Imagine a child entering the world for the very first time. No opinions, no beliefs, no idea of success or failure, no idea of who they are supposed to be, only pure awareness experiencing life as it is. Then, slowly and almost invisibly, the programming begins. People start giving names and meanings to everything. This is good. That is bad. This is success. That is failure. This is possible. That is impossible. At first, these ideas seem harmless, and in many ways they are necessary. They help us navigate the world. But over time, something deeper happens. We stop simply learning about reality and begin learning how reality is supposed to be interpreted. Little by little, an invisible framework starts forming inside the mind, a framework built from beliefs, expectations, fears, assumptions, and stories. Eventually, we forget that these are merely interpretations and begin mistaking them for reality itself. Carl Jung believed that much of human behavior is shaped by unconscious patterns operating beneath awareness, patterns inherited from family, culture, society, and personal experience. We do not consciously choose most of them, we absorb them. And once absorbed, they become the lens through which we see ourselves and the world. Think about it for a moment. Were all of your ambitions truly your own, or were they influenced by what others admired? Were all of your fears truly yours, or were they inherited from people who came before you? Were your beliefs carefully chosen, or simply accepted? This is how the Matrix begins, not with chains, walls, or control from the outside, but with identification. The moment you begin believing that every thought is yours, every belief is true, every fear is wisdom, and every story in your mind is reality. The Matrix does not imprison your body, it imprisons perception. And once perception is conditioned, reality itself begins to look different. The question is no longer whether the Matrix exists. The question is whether you can see it. The Matrix does not survive because someone forces it upon you. It survives because it becomes invisible. Think about a fish swimming in the ocean. It spends its entire life surrounded by water, yet rarely notices the water itself. Not because the water is hidden, but because it is everywhere. The Matrix works in much the same way. The beliefs you inherited, the assumptions you never questioned, the definitions of success, happiness, beauty, status, and worth. After years of repetition, they stop feeling like ideas and begin to feel like reality. And that is when the prison becomes truly powerful. Most people do not wake up each morning and consciously decide how they will live. Instead, they follow patterns. They think the same thoughts, worry about the same problems, react in the same ways, chase the same goals, and repeat the same emotional cycles over and over again. Not because they choose to, but because the program is running automatically. From the outside, it appears that everyone is making independent choices, yet millions of people are moving in the same direction, wanting the same things, fearing the same things, comparing themselves to the same standards, living according to invisible rules they never consciously agreed to. Work harder, earn more, buy more, become more, prove yourself, be somebody. These messages are repeated so often that they begin to feel self-evident. Very few people ever stop long enough to ask a simple question. Who decided that this is what life is supposed to be? Carl Jung observed that the greatest dangers are often not the things we can see, but the unconscious assumptions that shape our perception without our knowledge. The most effective prison is not the one that locks the body, it is the one that captures the mind. Once a belief becomes unconscious, it no longer feels like a belief, it feels like the truth. People begin defending opinions they never examined, identities they never chose, fears they never questioned. The prison slowly becomes part of who they think they are. But every once in a while, something unexpected happens. A loss, a heartbreak, a failure, a moment of silence so profound that the routine suddenly breaks. For a brief moment, the program stops, the noise fades, and a question appears. What if the life I've been living isn't truly mine? That question is dangerous to the matrix, because the moment you begin questioning the prison, you have already taken your first step beyond it. And yet there is an even deeper layer of the matrix, a layer so close to you, so familiar, and so constant that you have likely never noticed it at all. The voice inside your own head. There is a deeper layer of the matrix, a layer so close to you that most people never notice it at all. It has been with you for as long as you can remember, speaking when you wake up in the morning, speaking when you lie awake at night, commenting on everything you do, judging, comparing, worrying, remembering, predicting. Most people assume this voice is who they are. After all, it sounds like them, it knows their history, it speaks in the first person. But what if the most important assumption you've ever made is also the most mistaken? What if the voice in your head is not you, but something you have become identified with? Try something for a moment. Listen carefully to your next thought. Not the content of the thought, not whether it is positive or negative. Simply notice that it appears. One moment it isn't there, the next moment it arrives. And if you can notice the thought, then who is the one doing the noticing? This question sits at the heart of both Jung's work and Eckhart Tolle's teaching. Because the moment you begin observing your thoughts instead of automatically believing them, something extraordinary happens. A small distance appears between you and the voice. Most human beings spend their entire lives trapped inside a constant stream of mental activity, so trapped that they never realize they are trapped. The voice says, "You're not good enough," and they believe it. The voice says, "You will fail," and they believe it. The voice says, "You need this person to be happy," and they believe it. The voice says, "Something is missing," and they spend years chasing whatever it tells them will complete them. The tragedy is not that these thoughts appear, the tragedy is that they are rarely questioned. Carl Jung understood that much of what we call personality is built from unconscious patterns, forgotten fears, inherited beliefs, emotional wounds, and hidden aspects of the psyche that continue influencing us from the shadows. Eckhart Tolle approached the same mystery from another direction. He taught that human suffering deepens whenever we become completely identified with the mind. Different language, different paths, yet both were pointing toward a similar truth. The prison is not the thought itself. The prison is believing that every thought is you. Imagine sitting beside a river. Leaves are floating on the surface of the water. Some move quickly, some move slowly, some disappear around the bend. Thoughts behave in much the same way. They arise, they pass, they change. Yet most people jump into the river and allow the current to carry them wherever it wants to go. They become anger, they become fear, they become anxiety, they become desire. They forget that they were never the river. They were the awareness watching it all along. And this is where the matrix begins to crack. Because the moment you realize that you can observe your thoughts, you also realize that you are something more than your thoughts. The voice may continue speaking, the old patterns may continue appearing, but for the first time, you no longer have to obey them. For the first time, you begin to see the prison walls. And once a prison becomes visible, it becomes possible to leave. If the matrix is a prison of unconscious identification, then a question naturally follows. Who keeps rebuilding the prison? Most people immediately look outside themselves for the answer. Governments, media, corporations, social pressure. And while all of these can influence the shape of the prison, they are not its true architects. The deeper truth is far more uncomfortable. The matrix survives because something inside us keeps reconstructing it every single day. One of those architects is fear. Fear has accompanied humanity for thousands of years, helping us survive dangers in the physical world. But in the modern world, fear rarely appears as a wild animal waiting in the dark. Instead, it appears as thoughts. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being judged, fear of being left behind, fear of not being enough. Without realizing it, countless decisions are made in service of these fears. Careers are chosen because they feel safe. Dreams are abandoned because they seem risky. Opinions are hidden because they might invite criticism. The prison grows stronger, not because someone forces us into it, but because fear convinces us to remain inside. Another architect is desire. From an early age, we are taught that fulfillment exists somewhere in the future. A better job, more money, a bigger house, greater status, more recognition. The mind becomes obsessed with arrival. It constantly whispers, "Once I achieve this, then I will be happy. Once I have that, then I will finally feel complete." But when one goal is reached, another immediately appears. One horizon gives birth to another horizon. Years pass, sometimes entire lifetimes pass, and the sense of incompleteness remains. Not because something is missing, but because the mind has become addicted to seeking. Then there is comparison, perhaps one of the most powerful architects of all. Comparison quietly steals attention from the only life you can ever truly experience, your own. Instead of living directly, the mind begins measuring. Am I successful enough? Attractive enough? Wealthy enough? Intelligent enough? Every comparison creates another imaginary standard, another invisible wall, another reason to feel separate from life as it is. The mind turns existence into a competition, and the prison expands. Carl Jung observed that what remains unconscious eventually controls us. Eckhart Tolle pointed out that the ego survives through constant identification, with possessions, achievements, beliefs, roles, and personal stories. Different language, same warning. The matrix does not need chains to keep you trapped. It only needs you to believe that fear is wisdom, that desire is fulfillment, and that comparison is truth. But every illusion contains a weakness. Every prison has a crack somewhere in its walls. And the moment you begin seeing these architects clearly, fear loses some of its authority, desire loses some of its urgency, comparison loses some of its power. For the first time, you begin to realize that the walls were never as solid as they appeared. And that realization marks the beginning of something the Matrix fears more than anything else: awareness. For most people, awakening does not arrive as a dramatic event. There is no explosion of light, no voice from the sky, no sudden transformation. More often, it begins with something so small that it is easy to miss. A moment of awareness. A moment in which you suddenly realize that you are watching your thoughts instead of being completely lost inside them. Perhaps it happens during a difficult period in your life, a heartbreak, a loss, a failure, a moment when the old ways of thinking no longer provide the answers they once did. Or perhaps it happens in complete silence, while sitting alone, walking through nature, or staring into the darkness of the night. For a brief moment, the constant stream of mental noise pauses, the endless commentary slows down, and something unexpected appears: space. For the first time, there is a small distance between you and the voice in your head. The thought is still there, but something has changed. Instead of automatically believing it, you are observing it. Instead of becoming the fear, you are watching the fear. Instead of becoming the anxiety, you are witnessing the anxiety. The thought says one thing: awareness simply notices. This moment may seem insignificant, yet it changes everything. Because the matrix depends on unconsciousness. It depends on automatic identification. It depends on you believing every thought, reacting to every emotion, and following every impulse without question. The moment awareness enters the system, the spell begins to weaken. Imagine spending your entire life inside a movie, completely absorbed in the story, forgetting that you are sitting in a theater. Every scene feels real. Every character feels real. Every problem feels real. Then suddenly, for just a second, you become aware of the screen itself. The movie continues playing, but now you know something you did not know before. You are not inside the movie. You are the one watching it. This is why awareness is so powerful. It does not fight the matrix. It does not argue with the matrix. It simply reveals it. Carl Jung once wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In many ways, awakening begins the moment this process starts. Hidden patterns become visible. Old conditioning becomes visible. Automatic reactions become visible. The prison walls that once seemed solid begin to reveal themselves as constructions of the mind. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. Many people expect awakening to bring immediate peace. Instead, it often begins by revealing how deeply asleep we have been. We begin seeing the habits that control us, the fears that limit us, the stories we have repeated for years. The illusion becomes harder to ignore. But this discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is changing. Because once a wall becomes visible, it can no longer completely imprison you. And once awareness enters the prison, freedom is no longer a distant possibility. It becomes a direction, a path, a doorway that has been waiting for you all along. Perhaps the greatest illusion of the Matrix is the belief that freedom exists somewhere far away, somewhere in the future, somewhere outside of yourself. We spend years searching for the perfect circumstance, the perfect relationship, the perfect achievement, convinced that liberation will arrive when the conditions are finally right. But what if freedom was never something you needed to find? What if it was something you needed to remember? The truth is that escaping the matrix is not about rejecting society, abandoning your responsibilities, or withdrawing from the world. It is not about becoming someone else. It is about seeing clearly. It is about recognizing the difference between awareness and conditioning, between who you are and who you were taught to be, between the voice in your head and the deeper presence that has been silently observing your entire life. The matrix begins to lose its power the moment you stop believing everything your mind tells you. It weakens every time you question an unconscious belief. It weakens every time you become aware of a fear instead of obeying it. It weakens every time you choose presence over autopilot. These moments may seem small, but they are not. A life can change because of a single moment of awareness. A destiny can change because of a single question honestly asked. And perhaps that is the real meaning of awakening. Not becoming extraordinary, not becoming perfect, not escaping reality, but finally seeing reality without the filters that have shaped your perception for so long. The door was never locked, the prison was never as solid as it appeared, and the awareness that can guide you beyond it has been with you from the very beginning. If this message resonated with you, consider taking a moment to reflect on a simple question. Which belief, fear, or story have you been carrying for so long that you've mistaken it for who you are? Sometimes, a single question can open a door that years of searching could not. Thank you for spending these moments with me. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need to hear this message today. And if you'd like to continue exploring consciousness, awareness, psychology, and the deeper dimensions of human transformation, you'll find more videos waiting for you here on Until Awakening. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and remember, every awakening begins with a moment of seeing clearly.